My name is Della Whitmore, and I am 43 years old. On a gray Wednesday in March, a doctor at a small clinic outside Cedar Falls sat across from me and said I had 6 to 9 months left to live. I drove out of that parking lot, a wife carrying bad news, planning exactly how I would tell my husband that night. I never got to say a single word of it. That evening I came home early. I found the barn lights off and my husband's truck already parked in the drive, which was strange on its own. I walked toward the barn in my work boots, quiet without meaning to be, and I heard him laughing into his phone in a voice I had not heard directed at anyone in years. What I caught in the next few seconds through that open door changed every plan I had made in that parking lot. I want you to understand what I was protecting, so you would have to see this place in October. Whitmore Orchard sits on 120 acres outside Cedar Falls, about half an hour from town, and in picking season the whole hillside smells like cider and wood smoke. My first husband, Ray Whitmore, planted most of those rows with his own 2 hands. We were married 13 years and raised 2 children in that farmhouse, my daughter Josie, who got my stubborn streak and my handwriting, and my son Tanner, who could fix any engine built before he was born. Ray died 7 years ago, a heart attack between the rows on an ordinary September morning. He was fine at breakfast and gone before lunch. I was 35 years old. Everyone in town assumed I would sell the place within the year. Instead, I learned the spray schedules, took over the books, and carried that farm through a late frost that wiped out half the county's harvest the following spring. Every October, we still throw the same harvest dinner Ray's parents used to throw, hay wagon rides, the press running all day, kids sticky to the elbows with cider. Josie was 22 now, studying agricultural business up at the state college, and coming home most weekends the farm needed her. Tanner was 17, a senior in high school, better with machines than most grown men in the county. For a year after Ray died, I ran that farm alone and told myself alone was just quiet with more chores. Then, at an equipment auction on a rainy Thursday, a man in a good jacket bid against me for sprayer, lost the bid on purpose, and made me laugh out in the parking lot afterward. I was careful. I had buried one husband and rebuilt a farm out of grief, and I knew better than most people how fast a good thing turns. But careful only lasts so long. His name was Marcus Reeve, a sales manager at the farm equipment dealership in town, 44 years old, widowed once himself, with an easy charm that made waitresses remember his coffee order. He courted me slow and steady for almost 2 years before I said yes. My lawyer, a woman named Grace Holloway who had handled the farm's paperwork since Ray died, refused to smile until I signed a prenuptial agreement. The farm and the trust Ray and I had built together would stay mine and pass to my children. If we ever divorced, Marcus would get $50,000 and his personal belongings and nothing else. I braced myself for an argument. Marcus read the whole thing once and signed it without a fight. "I am not marrying this orchard, Della," he told me. "I am marrying you." Everyone at the wedding thought that line was romantic. For the first 5 years, honestly, it mostly was. Marcus learned every neighbor's name by his first Christmas here. He shook hands at the harvest dinner like he had planted the trees himself. Somewhere in those years, he became the public face of Whitmore Orchard, and I became the woman who kept the books behind him. His name crept onto things slowly, the way frost creeps onto a window. A card on the farm account for convenience. A signature line at the co-op for convenience. Power of attorney 3 years into the marriage because a friend's wife had a stroke and it scared us both, and that too was for convenience. Convenience is a door you leave unlocked for someone you trust. You never think to ask who else has noticed it standing open. The trouble started in February during pruning season, a dull ache in my back that wrapped around toward my stomach like a belt pulled 1 notch too tight. I had aches my whole working life. You do not farm without them, but this one did not go away. Then my appetite disappeared. I dropped almost 10 pounds without trying. My hands itched at night, and one morning in the bathroom mirror my eyes looked faintly yellow, and I blamed the light bulb. I did what I have always done with a problem, which is handle it myself and keep quiet about it. I booked a doctor's appointment on a Tuesday and scheduled the follow-up scan between 2 cider deliveries so nobody would think to ask where I had gone. I did not tell Josie. I did not tell Tanner. I told myself that was not secrecy, that was simply not making my children carry a maybe. The scan technician was young, with kind eyes and a talkative streak, and about 2 minutes in she stopped talking altogether. She kept circling back to the same spot under my ribs. They got me in for a CT scan 2 days later, which is fast, and fast is never good news in a hospital. The specialist's name was Dr. Amara Voss, and I will be grateful forever that she did not soften it. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4 already in my liver, which meant surgery was off the table before we had even sat down. There was chemotherapy, not to cure it, she said, but to slow it down, to buy time. How much time? I asked. She said months, not years, even with treatment. She asked about family history, and when I told her what took my own mother at 52, she stopped calling 43 young. I sat in my truck in that parking lot for almost 40 minutes afterward, hands at 10 and 2, going exactly nowhere. 43 years old, 2 kids barely grown, maybe 1 harvest left. I decided I would tell Marcus that night, before my nerve went. I practiced the words out loud to the rearview mirror. Marcus, I have cancer. It is the bad kind. We need to talk about what comes next. I had the words ready and a casserole plan to go along with them. I never got to use either one. I came home early, and that is when I heard him laughing in the dark barn on a call I was never supposed to overhear. Most of what he said was low murmur, but 3 steps closer, in the shadow between the press and the wall, his words came through clean. Relax, he said. She is not going to be around forever. Then a soft laugh. I stood there in the smell of last year's apples with a fresh diagnosis folded up in my coat pocket, listening to my husband tell someone I would not be around much longer. He was right, of course, and that is exactly what made my ears ring. When gravel shifted under my boot, he turned around, and I watched his whole expression change gears, smooth as an automatic transmission. Hey you, he said, parts guy on the line, the tractor clutch is on backorder again. I have kept books for 20 years, and lies have a bookkeeping all their own. The parts counter closed at 5. It was almost 7. He hung up a personal phone that was somehow already tucked back into his jacket, kissed my cheek, and asked what was for supper. I heard myself say pot roast. Some part of me had already gone cold and quiet, the way the orchard goes still right before a hard frost, every living thing pulling its sap down deep where the cold cannot reach it. I did not tell my husband I was dying that night. Instinct got there before I did. I gave it 3 days, watching him the way I watched the sky before a spring storm, polite on the surface, taking notes underneath. That Saturday he left for his usual sales circuit, 3 days of dealerships downstate, and for once in his tidy life, he forgot his toolbox by the barn door. Underneath the bottom tray was a phone I had never seen, no case, barely locked, the code his own birthday. I am not proud of what I did next, and I would do it again. The messages went back nearly 7 months, all to one contact saved simply as R. Hotel confirmations in the city on nights my kitchen calendar said trade show. A photograph I will not describe. Complaints about my spreadsheets, my careful budgeting, my sentimental attachment to the trees. And running through all of it again and again, the lease. Once the lease is signed we are set, he had written. Tell the board it is, as good as done. She will come around, I handle her paperwork. R was Renata Cole, an executive at Cole Cold Storage, a company that had spent over a year courting us to lease our cider house and 30 rows of road frontage for the next 20 years. The deal Marcus kept sliding across the kitchen table like a dinner plate, calling it free money, calling me stubborn for not signing. The affair and the deal were the same animal wearing 2 faces. I laid every message out on the workbench and photographed each screen with my own phone, steady as if I were taking inventory. Then I wiped my prints off with a shop rag and set the phone back under the tray, exactly where I found it. Marcus taught me that trick without ever meaning to. That night I sat in the cider house until morning with a horse blanket around my shoulders, doing arithmetic in my head. I was dying, and the man I had married was waiting on it. Josie and Tanner would grieve fine in their hearts. They had already buried one father and knew the shape of that grief. The real problem was the stretch just before death, not death itself. Around 3 a.m. it hit me like ice water down the collar. 2 years earlier, in love and trying to be practical, I had signed power of attorney over to Marcus, both medical and financial. If this disease took my mind before it took my body, the man who said she is not going to be around forever would be holding the pen. He could reach my accounts. He could speak for me to my own doctors. So I made 2 decisions before sunrise, and I never once went back on either one. First, Marcus Reeve would not learn that I was dying. He did not get to grieve me while he was still robbing me. Second, every signature, every paper, every locked door would be finished before this year's harvest dinner in October. At 7 sharp, I called Grace Holloway. Marcus wanted my signature on Renata's lease by Labor Day. I decided he would get my signature on something else entirely. Grace has been my lawyer for years, with a face like a closed filing cabinet, exactly what you want in that chair. I told her about the phone. I did not yet tell her about the diagnosis. I was not ready for how her face would change. We spread my whole life across her conference table like a map before a storm. The trust Ray and I built held up fine. Land, cider house, equipment, all separate property with me as trustee, untouchable in a divorce. The prenup held up too. But Grace's pen stopped twice while she read. First, if I died while still married, the agreement let Marcus stay in the farmhouse a full year and collect $150,000 from a life insurance policy I had kept out of plain decency. Death was a far better deal for him than divorce. Second, the power of attorney documents. These make him you the moment you cannot speak for yourself, she said, sliding them across like 2 dead mice. I told her I wanted it all undone. New documents, new trust arrangements, and a divorce, quietly and fast. She asked if I had the time for quiet. I said, let us just say I have a deadline. Harvest. She did not push further. Good lawyers know which questions to leave alone. We started that same afternoon. And the following Tuesday, I started something I could not tell even Grace about. They placed a small port under my collarbone on a Thursday, and the Tuesday after that I sat in a recliner and let a nurse run chemotherapy into my veins on purpose. I wore a small pump home under my flannel shirt for 2 more days while I made supper for a man who was quietly planning my funeral spending. My cover story was a quilting group in town that has never once actually seen me. Neither, honestly, had my own husband in years, not really looked at me, not since our 2nd anniversary. I counted on exactly that. And here is the joke life told at my expense. His affair became my alibi. The days he was on his sales circuit or held over in the city were the very days I was sickest, hollowed out and gray, holding onto the bathroom sink for balance. Life has a sense of humor. It is not always a kind one. That spring became a rhythm. Chemo on Tuesdays, paperwork on Thursdays, pot roast on Sundays. Nobody suspected a thing, almost nobody. Grace drew up the first documents, revoking the old power of attorney outright and naming Josie as my new agent, both medical and financial, the moment I could no longer act for myself. Getting Josie's signature, without explaining why, took some doing. I called it an annual estate cleanup, the kind of thing mothers say when they need a signature without a conversation. She signed at my kitchen table on a Sunday, her eyes lingering on me a beat too long. You would tell me if something was wrong, she said. It was not really a question, so I did not answer it. Then the bank. I asked politely to remove the convenience card on the farm's operating account, the one carrying Marcus's name. No drama, accounts get tidied all the time. But the branch manager lowered his voice at the end. Since you are here, Mrs. Reeve, he told me, Mr. Reeve came in last month asking about a home equity line against the orchard parcel. I told him only the trustee could apply. I thanked him with my church face and drove home the long way, doing the math out loud the whole drive. Money against my own land, requested behind my back, weeks before he ever stood laughing in that barn doorway. Marcus was already trying doors. He simply did not know yet that I had started changing the locks. Tanner turned 18 at the end of April, and we threw him a party at the farmhouse. Cake, a bonfire out back, my kitchen loud with everyone I love, and one person I was quietly divorcing. Marcus was wonderful that night, and that is the thing nobody tells you about charming men. The charm is real. He told an old story about a runaway hay wagon until Tanner's friends were hiccuping with laughter. Josie caught my eye over the cake like she was checking my temperature, and I smiled back the way you smile when your whole face is a locked barn door. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Marcus got quiet over a glass of whiskey and told me a true thing for once. His father had spent 9 years dying slowly of dementia, and his mother had spent those same 9 years feeding a man who no longer remembered her name. She went into that room a wife, he said, and came out a ghost. Nobody should be asked to do that. It explained him. It did not excuse him. Those are two different ledgers, and I keep both of them. In May, I did some homework on cold storage, because you should always read the fine print on the people who are stealing from you. The lease Marcus kept pushing would hand the cider house and 30 rows of road frontage over for 20 full years. 20 years, and I would be lucky to see one more harvest. He had left a folder in his truck, careless the way winners get careless, and inside was a draft agreement with my name already typed on the signature line, waiting only for ink. Clipped behind it was a printed email from Renata. If she keeps stalling, is there another route? It read. You said you handle her paperwork. There it was in plain type, the power of attorney I had already killed on paper. That had been the other route, sitting in a drawer for 2 years with my own signature already on it. By the second week of May, after a checkup that went better than I had any right to expect, I stood alone in the cider house with a carpenter's pencil. Ray used to write the harvest tally on the big beam above the press, and I found a clear stretch of grain and wrote in block letters, last best harvest, 2nd Saturday of October. I stood back and looked at those words until my eyes behaved themselves. That Sunday at dinner, I announced this year's harvest dinner would be the biggest we had ever thrown, the whole town invited, both presses running, music, the works. Tanner hooped. Josie started a list on her phone before I had even finished the sentence. Marcus raised his glass and said, Here is to one for the ages. I clinked my iced tea against his beer and thought, Mister, you have no idea. For everyone else it was a party. For me it was a finish line. Scans in June brought a partial response. The spots on my liver had shrunk slightly. This buys months, Dr. Voss told me, not years. I told her honest was the only currency I still had time for. It was a gift with a receipt attached because the same chemotherapy buying me time was also collecting interest in the form of numbness creeping into my fingertips. A trustee needs a steady signature, and mine was going numb one finger at a time. I called Grace and told her to stop drafting like a careful lawyer and start drafting like a woman late for a bus. Within 2 weeks, we finished a full trust restatement. Josie would step up as co-trustee immediately, with equal authority over every acre and every account. Not someday, not if I faded, but now. Grace's own firm was named Trust Protector, so a 22-year-old would never have to stand alone against anyone. Josie would be sole successor trustee after me. The farm and cider house split evenly between her and Tanner, college funds locked in for both, and Marcus would receive precisely what the prenup promised him, and not 1 bushel more. Are you ready to be looked after? Grace asked me once the papers were drafted. You have never once shared a checkbook in your life. No, I told her, but drafted anyway. She smiled for what felt like the first time in years, and scheduled the signing for a Friday. The signing took the better part of an hour and rearranged the rest of my life. 2 witnesses, a notary, a letter from Dr. Voss certifying I was of sound mind and full capacity, and a small camera on a tripod in the corner recording every page turn. Armor, Grace called it, in case anyone ever tried to claim a sick woman had not known what she was signing. I had practiced my signature the night before on scratch paper, retraining my numb fingers the way you would retrain a stroke patient. When the moment came, I wrote my full name slow and clean, better penmanship than I had managed in years. "Why the hurry?" Grace asked gently, once the ink was drying. "You give the harvest to the ones who tended the tree," I told her. She opened her desk drawer and set a second stack of paper in front of me, already typed and tabbed. The divorce petition. I took it home under a bag of onions and sat with it for 3 days, which were not calm days. Filing meant lawyers on both sides, months of process, maybe a fight, hours of the exact resource I was rationing most carefully. It also meant telling my children their stepfather had been quietly selling off pieces of our family. Not filing meant sitting across the breakfast table from a man who checked my appetite the way a farmer checks the weather. Marcus made the decision for me, without knowing it. All through June, he kept pushing the lease, sliding the folder next to my dinner plate twice a week. "Renata's board needs an answer by Labor Day," he said. "You're being sentimental about a shed." The night I finally told him the cider house was not for rent in my lifetime, his charm slipped for exactly 2 seconds, jaw tight, eyes gone flat and cold, and I saw the man from those phone messages look out through my husband's face. Then the mask slid back into place, and he laughed and called me his stubborn farm girl. 2 seconds was plenty. That same week Tanner mentioned, innocent as rain, that Marcus had put a deposit down on a condo in the city, some investment with a friend, and had asked Tanner not to bother me with it since I had enough on my plate. A condo, a new truck back in March, money coming in from a deal that had not even closed. He was spending my sickness before I had finished writing the end of it myself. I told my children the truth in halves that Sunday, and I will answer for that arithmetic someday. I laid out the printed messages and the hotel bookings and the email about handling my paperwork without any speech to go with them. Josie wanted to go straight to the whole county, church, the co-op, the local paper if it came to that. Tanner did not move at all, which was worse. "We will not fight him with noise," I told them. Noise is his home field. He can charm a jury right out of its shoes. We fight with paper, patience, and a clean conscience. The petition went to the courthouse that Tuesday. By Friday, Marcus was served an envelope at the diner while buying Renata's lunch with my money. He came home furious, then charming, then bargaining, running through his whole repertoire while I mended the elbow of an old work coat and said nothing. Finally, I laid the printed photographs on the table between us, one at a time, in the order I had found them. I watched him run out of words for the first time in 5 years of marriage. Word got around town anyway, the way it does, and Marcus made sure everyone saw a sad, wronged husband instead of the truth. He sat quiet in the third pew, quiet at the co-op counter, letting good-hearted neighbors ask what was wrong and then declining to answer, eyes wet, letting them draw their own conclusions. The town patted his shoulder and looked at me sideways. I forbade Josie from handing out the truth like flyers. If the last thing I ever taught my daughter was how to win ugly, that would be my legacy, and I refused to leave that behind. Then his lawyer decided to contest the prenup outright, claiming Marcus had signed under pressure 2 days before the wedding. It was a weak claim, Grace told me over the phone, but weak claims still cost months, maybe a year if they dragged out discovery.
"He thinks time costs you nothing," she said.
For most clients, that would be true. July's chemotherapy hit hard. I spent one whole night on my bathroom floor with the faucet running to cover the sound, while the man contesting my prenup watched a ball game 1 floor below, his laughter drifting up through the vents. And then past midnight the phone rang. Josie, her voice tight as wire. A nurse from the cancer center had called her looking for me, wanting to know why she was listed as my emergency contact. "It is a scheduling office, sweetheart," I told her. "They call about everything." A long silence followed, my own silence, inherited and aimed right back at me. By August, the lease deal finally died on its own. With the trust restated and the divorce moving forward, Renata's board took the cold storage site elsewhere, and with the lease, went most of her interest in Marcus. He did not know that I knew, but the signs were easy to read. The second phone stopped leaving his pocket, then stopped mattering at all. Late one night, I came down for my pills, hidden in the flour canister because Marcus had never baked a thing in his life, and found him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, his father's old watch laid out on the wood in front of him. "I keep thinking about my mother," he said, more to the table than to me. 9 years in that room. "I cannot sit in a room where somebody is dying, Della. I watched it eat her alive. I know exactly what that makes me." It was the truest sentence Marcus Reeve ever said in my kitchen, arriving 5 months too late to matter. "Lucky for you, then," I told him, "that nobody here is dying. Go to bed."
He went.
He slept right through the closest he ever came to the truth. In mid-August, my eyes went yellow for real. No light bulb to blame this time, along with a fever. The cancer had pinched off the drain in my liver, and they admitted me for 3 days to place a stent. Marcus was away at the state fair the whole time, believing I was in town canning tomatoes with Josie. But the hospital called my emergency contact, and Josie walked into that room and saw everything at once. The wristband printed with oncology, the port scar above my gown, my color gone the shade of late corn. "How long?" she asked, flat like me. "Since March, sweetheart," I finally said. "I am dying. It is my pancreas. There is no fixing it, only time, and I have spent it making things right." She did not shout. She sat on the edge of the bed and put her forehead down against my hand, and we stayed like that while a machine counted my heartbeat out loud. Josie and Tanner wanted one thing changed that very night, and by every fair rule they were right to want it. "Tell the court," they said. "A judge who learns a wife is terminal moves a divorce fast. Sympathy is a kind of lubricant. Tell Marcus, and let him carry it." I said no, and I need you to understand why, because everything after depends on it. The day Marcus learns I am dying, he becomes the grieving husband, and he will wear my death like a fine suit all over this county for the rest of his life. He does not get to wear that suit. At the settlement conference, his lawyer played exactly the game Grace predicted, pushing for recognition of 5 years of contribution, threatening to litigate the prenup's validity, spending my time like he had found a copy of my calendar. I asked for 5 minutes and spoke for myself. "Marcus, the prenup says 50,000. I will make it 80. You keep the truck. Each side pays its own legal fees. In exchange, you sign this week. The judgment enters as soon as the law allows. You are out of the house in 30 days, and you waive every claim on the trust, the estate, and the insurance. Take it or litigate." He took it, fast enough to embarrass his own lawyer, and then, reaching for the pen, he added one more request. "Let me come to the harvest dinner," he said. "People will expect it. It looks strange otherwise." I told him no, plain as a frost date, but I offered him one thing in trade. I would never tell this town why our marriage ended. No announcements, no letters to the editor. He could keep the story. I would keep the orchard. The judgment came through the last week of September, prenup honored, plus the extra I had offered for a quiet October. In the courthouse parking lot, I worked my wedding ring off over a knuckle the chemo had thickened and dropped it into an envelope with old gas receipts. 2 weeks out from the harvest dinner, new scans showed the cancer growing again. Chemo had gone from buying months to renting weeks, and the rent was costing everything I had left, my hands, my stomach, my hours upright. "We are done with Tuesdays," I told Dr. Voss. "I have a dinner to throw." She did not argue. Good doctors know a harvest decision when they hear one. Hospice was scheduled to begin the week after the dinner. That October, I turned the cider house into a letter factory, writing one birthday letter each for Josie and Tanner every year until they turned 30, sealed and numbered in 2 shoe boxes. Tanner rigged his phone on a tripod between the trees, and I recorded the things paper cannot hold, how to tell a ripe apple by the sound it makes coming off the branch, how to know when the cider is set. The story of how their father lost my wedding ring in the hay and proposed to me twice in the same afternoon. The second Saturday of October came up gold and winless. The whole town showed up, the co-op men, the church pews, kids I had watched grow up now unloading their own children into my rows. Both presses ran from 9 in the morning. Late in the afternoon, I gathered just my family by the cider house door, no audience, and put the brass key ring into Josie's hand. Your grandfather carried these, then your father, then me, now you. I told her the true thing too, that I would rather see the keys in her hand than only imagine them there. Towards sundown, Marcus's truck eased up the road and stopped shy of the gate, thinner in the face, the good jacket hanging off him differently now. I know, he said before I could speak. I made one mistake against 5 good years. Renata is finished. It was never real. Everything I actually have is standing on this farm. I am asking for one conversation. That is all. In my coat pocket, my thumb found the edge of the hospice intake letter, dated for the coming Monday. One sentence, and the whole county would know exactly what I had carried alone all year, and Marcus would spend the rest of his life buried under it. I looked at him a long moment, and what I saw was not my enemy anymore, just a scared man still running from a sick room. Go home, Marcus, I told him. That is all. He waited a moment for more, because there had always been more from everybody his whole charming life. There was not any more. He got in his truck and drove off, and not one person in that yard followed him. Hospice arrived that Monday, exactly as the letter said. November was gentler than I probably deserved. Josie kept a spiral notebook tracking every dose, and every hour in handwriting so close to mine it ached to look at. Tanner washed my hands warm every evening and worked lotion into my knuckles, slow and careful, and brought me 1 apple a day, calling it medicine with a completely straight face. The first hard frost came on a Thursday. I remember thinking the trees already know how to do this, how to let go, and then bloom again. I finished my last letters in that bed, sealed the one marked for the first harvest I miss, and told Josie plainly, next October, under the old tree, read it out loud with everybody present. I died just before sunrise on the 3rd of December, with the window cracked an inch, so I could hear the wind in the rows one more time, Josie on one side of the bed and Tanner on the other. The funeral filled the church past the coat rack. Marcus came late, sliding into the back pew during the first hymn, dressed sharp, face carefully arranged. The pastor read what I had asked him to read, that I had been diagnosed back in March, that I had carried it alone through spring and summer without a single complaint, that I had planned my own goodbye down to the last letter, and that through every hardship, business and personal alike, I had carried it quietly so my family could live free of it a little longer. You could watch the dates land on Marcus, pew by pew, the whole church doing the same math at the same moment. March, before the divorce papers he had cried about at the diner, before the settlement where he had squeezed extra money out of a dying woman, before the gate and go home, Marcus. Nobody spoke to him at the reception. Nobody had to. This is Josie now, finishing my mother's story. By spring the settlement money was mostly gone, swallowed by a truck payment and back rent above a laundromat. Nobody ran Marcus out of town, and Mom made sure of that before she died. The co-op still sells to him, polite as a toll booth. It is only that the sympathy stopped coming with the coffee, and conversations tend to end early when he sits down. Renata Cole leased her cold storage site 2 counties over and has never once said his name in public since, which might be the coldest sentence in this whole story. Mom did not fix the whole world. She fixed our corner of it, 120 acres held in a trust that still runs exactly like her handwriting, straight and clear. Tanner rebuilt the press bearings in March, muttering to our father's old tools the same way she used to. I keep the books at her desk now, and twice a month I still catch myself reaching for the phone to ask her something. This past October, the second Saturday came up gold again, as if the weather still keeps her calendar. We ran both presses, the whole town came back, and nobody mentioned the empty chair by the cider house door, and everybody saw it anyway. At dusk, I opened the letter marked for the first harvest I miss, and read my mother's own words out loud under the old tree. My loves, if you are reading this, then the orchard did exactly what orchards do. It outlived the farmer, which is the whole point of planting. Taste this year's cider and argue about it like your father would. You give the harvest to the ones who tended the tree. You tended me, all of you. I got the best rose. It was signed the way she signed everything, no flourish, just her name, sure of itself. Della Whitmore. If this story reminded you to update your own paperwork, your trust, your power of attorney, your emergency contacts, take it as a sign and do it this week. Share it with someone who carries too much alone.